Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website arh.noaa.gov, get any updates to the forecast there, and you can look for any watches, warnings, advisories that we may have out at the time. Our weather info line of 1-800-472-0391, get updates to the forecast through that means as well. And we have Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube accounts, so you can look us up on those means as well. Starting us off, a quick look at the advisories that we have out for the area. All of them are along the west coast on all freezing rain advisories. The one in the lower Yukon Valley and St. Lawrence Islands stretching up towards the Bering Strait coast. Both of those are active from now until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Then as we get further to the north from Shishmaref up towards Point Hope, that one starts tonight at midnight and then goes until 9 a.m. on Friday. So again, you can visit our website to check out any additional information on those and check if they are going to be extended or canceled and any other kind of changes that may be made. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, as we start this loop, we have a larger low pressure system further to the south that is moving up towards the western Aleutian Islands. As we watch this, you can see it making its way closer. But again, we're going to watch this loop one more time, and this low is starting to make its way up there, but already it's occluding and starting to slow down, losing a lot of its energy, so we are not expecting it to actually make it all the way up to the western Aleutian Islands. And you can see as the main part of the low really starts to lose its momentum and starts to really kind of just sit in one area. So we're going to see a little bit of that cloud cover extend out over the Aleutian Islands, but not a whole lot of activity in terms of precipitation. A little bit of the winds, but not the strongest winds, are going to be closer down towards the main part of the low. Then out over the main part of the state, most of the activity is out to the west. That is because out over the eastern part of the state, especially in the upper levels, we have high pressure extending in that's keeping much of the activity out along the west coast and in areas from Kenai Peninsula down into the Aleutian Islands. As we watch this loop, we can see a couple of lows out in the Bering Sea and another one forming to the south of the Alaska Peninsula here. So we have our one way out to the west. That's a pretty weak low, but pretty well defined on satellite. And as we watch the loop again, we can see a low forming just to the south of Sand Point here, and starting to see some flow from the south being brought up ahead of that low pressure system, bringing in a lot of the cloud cover out over the western part of the state. As we look down at our surface charts here, we can see that low at the front extending up along the western coast of the state, bringing in a lot of warmer air, some stronger winds with that as well. And we're having some of that rain extend in from the Prince William Sound area through the Kenai Peninsula, down around Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay. So you get further to the north, we have some snow there, and that snow is going to push further to the north as the afternoon and evening hours roll on. But this rain is going to follow behind it with that southerly flow, transitioning that snow over to rain. And that's where we're going to see a lot of those freezing rain conditions develop and push further to the north as time moves on this afternoon and evening hours. Out over the Bering Sea, low is bringing some rain into areas of the eastern Aleutian Islands, becoming snow as we get further to the north. Still snow right now for the Pribilofs. Then further out west, the other low not doing a whole lot in terms of precipitation, but it is bringing some cloud cover to areas out in the western Aleutian Islands. Then out over the main part of the state, much of the interior is pretty dry in terms of weather, but we are going to see some light snow showers along the Alaska Range, getting up to Delta Junction area as well. Rest of the interior pretty clear, and then along the Arctic coast we are going to see some snow mixed with fog and some occasional areas of blowing snow with the stronger winds behind this front along the Arctic coastline. Down in the southeast part of the state, pretty clear and dry. And then as we move into the tonight period, going to remain that way in the southeast, a little bit more cloud cover, however. But as we move along the Gulf Coast, we are going to see some more precipitation with that southerly flow bringing in rain along areas of the Prince William Sound into the south central and mixing with snow, especially in the higher elevation locations and as we get further into the Susitna Valley. Then along the southwest part of the state, starting from Kodiak, we are going to see some rain in there, pushing further to the north as that southerly flow is pushing the snow further up the coastline, but we are seeing precipitation now all the way up towards the Point Hope area throughout Kotzebue and Norton Sounds. And we are going to see a lot of that mixed precipitation where snow falling with some occasional areas of freezing rain with that, which is why we have those advisories out. And then up along the Arctic coast, we have some snow mixed with fog expected to linger throughout the night. Much of the rest of the interior, especially out east, should not have any kind of precipitation. But as we look at the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands, still going to see some rain mixing with snow as we get further to the west and further to the north. A rain-snow mix now expected for the Pribilofs, but in the northern parts of the Bering extending out to the west, we're going to have more northerly flow out there, bringing in snow showers, and those snow showers are going to make it all the way down to the western Aleutian Islands, giving Shimia some snow for tonight. Moving into Thursday, the low is really starting to weaken now, but still enough to bring that continued southerly flow with some rain pushing into the Bristol Bay area, still transitioning over to snow with occasional areas of rain mixed in with that as we get further to the north. And then throughout the day, we're watching those freezing rain conditions transition from the south further to the north as more of that warm air overrides the colder air that's sitting in place over those areas. Up along the Arctic coast, the snow and fog combination is still going to remain through much of the day on Thursday. Out over the Bering Sea, some snow activity way out to the west, pretty dry in the central Aleutians, but a rain and snow mix as we get out to the eastern Aleutian Islands. As we move over to the south central, not a whole lot of precipitation over the main parts, but as we get down into the Kenai Peninsula, we are going to see some rain moving in from the south there as well. In the rest of the interior, pushing up to the Brooks Range, not going to see any precipitation, especially out in the eastern areas. In the southeast, we are going to finally start to see some isolated rain showers in the southern portions as we move throughout the day on Thursday. As we move into Friday, that's going to clear up, and once again, high pressure is going to come in and dominate this area, bringing a lot of better weather for the southeast. High pressure moving in over places in the northern Gulf now. Still some lingering isolated showers, primarily snow, but mixing with rain as we get closer to Cordova area. And then as we move into the interior, pretty clear and dry up all the way along the Arctic coast. A little bit more cloud cover and precipitation as we move further to the west, with some snow up by the Kotzebue Sound area, still mixing in with a little rain as we get over the Norton Sound area, and then primarily snow as we get into the YK Delta area. High pressure moving in over the central part of the Bering Sea, preventing a lot of precipitation in that area as well. But there are going to be some lingering isolated showers as we get into the Alaska Peninsula down through the Aleutian Islands. On the eastern parts, that's going to primarily be on the Pacific side as the flow is coming up from the south. And the opposite is true as we get to the western Aleutian Islands, with that northerly flow going to leave most of those rain and snow showers on the Bering side of those islands. Taking us into our temperature forecast for this afternoon, we will take a look out in the southeast first, in the upper 30s to lower 40s. Warmest as we get further to the south, 43 degrees at Ketchikan this afternoon. Coldest as we get further to the north, 37 degrees for Haines, and then Yakutat at 47 as we move out further to the west. Into the south central area in the lower 30s as we are further to the north and more inland, and then as we get out closer to the Gulf, getting up to as high as 44 at Homer. Colder in the Glen Allen area, only 4 degrees there for this afternoon. Moving further to the north, temperatures in the east primarily in the teens, getting into the 20s as we get further off to the west. Pretty cold right now for Fort Yukon, 1 degree this afternoon, and then as we get along the Arctic coastline, temperatures around 0 in the east, and then getting up into the teens as we get further to the west. taking us into the Kotzebue Sound area where we're getting into the lower to mid 20s there, with Kotzebue at 24 degrees. Down in the Norton Sound area, Nome, the warmest, 35 degrees there, into the upper 20s as we get further to the south. And then we can move over to the southwest part of the state. Bethel, 38 degrees this afternoon, getting up into the lower 40s as we get into the Bristol Bay area. 44 degrees for King Salmon this afternoon. Then taking us down into the Alaska Peninsula, 43 for both Cold Bay and Sand Point. And then down along the Aleutian Islands, dropping all the way down to right around 30 degrees for the central and western Aleutian Islands, 30 degrees for Adak, and then the Pribilofs getting right around the freezing mark with St. Paul at 32 degrees this afternoon. Staying out in this area for our lows tonight, dropping down right around freezing throughout many of the Aleutian Islands and the Pribilofs in the mid-30s as we get further to the east around the Cold Bay area. And then as we go into the Bristol Bay area, then we have temperatures down into the mid-30s there as well, and 34 degrees for Bethel and other areas around the YK Delta, dropping down into the lower 30s there. Norton Sound area down into the 20s, and a little bit colder as we get further to the north. Kotzebue Sound area, the upper teens, expected lows tonight. Then up along the Arctic coast, Barrow getting down to -8 degrees, Deadhorse all the way down to -13, taking us into the interior. Places further to the north along the Brooks Range getting down below 0, with Fort Yukon getting all the way down to -23 degrees, and then down into the interior, staying in the single digits for most locations. Further off to the east, expecting those to get down below 0. Down in the south central, a little bit warmer, staying in the lower to mid-30s there, with Homer down to 32 degrees expected low tonight, Kodiak down to 36 degrees. And then down in the southeast part of the state, coldest to the north, 20 degrees for Haines and 38 for Ketchikan. Quite a big shift there with a lot warmer conditions further to the south. Highs for tomorrow getting up into the mid to upper 40s in southern parts of the southeast, only getting up to around 38 for Juneau and Haines. And as we move into the south central, getting up into the lower 40s there, colder for Glen Allen once again, 19 degrees expected high. Then into the interior part of the state, getting into the teens, a little bit colder as we get further off to the east, only in the single digits for Arctic Village and Fort Yukon, and then along the Arctic coast, not getting above freezing for the places all along the Arctic coast, but not even above 0 for places from Barrow to the east, down the western coast of the state into the mid to upper 20s there, into the mid to upper 30s as we get to the Norton Sound area, and then down in the YK Delta and Bristol Bay areas, getting up to around 40 degrees, with a little bit warmer temperatures further to the south, and then in the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands, mid to upper 30s there, with St. Paul getting up to 34 expected high tomorrow. Changing pace, looking at our flying weather with all the lows that are out over the Bering Sea, expecting to see a lot of MVFR and IFR conditions out there, stretching up along the west coast of the state, and with the snow and fog along the Arctic coast, expecting to see some MVFR conditions there. And with our flow bringing in a lot of rain to places along the Gulf Coast and starting to make their way into the Bristol Bay area along the Aleutian and Alaska ranges, some MVFR and IFR conditions there. Brings us into our passes. Anaktuvik should be VFR for tomorrow. Adigan should also be VFR throughout the day. Lake Clark and Merrill will both primarily be MVFR, but on that eastern side with the rain coming in, expecting to see some isolated IFR conditions on that eastern edge of those passes. Similarly for Rainy Pass, MVFR primarily, but some IFR conditions way out east. And then windy should be VFR throughout the day, as well as Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass, all expected to be VFR. Tanita Pass should also be VFR for tomorrow. Portage, MVFR, but like the others, going to see some occasional IFR conditions on the eastern side of the pass. Then Chilkoot and White should both be VFR throughout the day. Taking a look at our freezing level, we have that warmer air coming in from the south, and you can see that with these higher freezing levels extending out over much of mainland Alaska. And then with our surface freezing line stretching along the North Gulf Coast through the YK Delta area, down and through the central Bering Sea and out by the western Aleutian Islands. As we look at our icing for tomorrow, primarily located with the activity on the western coast, above 8,000 feet as we get further to the south, rising up a little bit above 12,000 feet as we get closer to the Kotzebue Sound area. And then the low to the south, it's not going to quite make it for the most part to the western Aleutian Islands. We are going to see some of that cloud cover, bringing in some icing between 4,000 and 10,000 feet way out to the west. Taking a look at our jet stream, the strongest part of the jet is well to the south of the Aleutian Islands, getting up to as high as 150 knots. But over the west coast, bringing in that strong southerly flow, 95 knots coming in from the southeast, and then coming back across over the Arctic coast, 105 knots, exiting off into Canada, moving around our high pressure over the state. Dropping us down to 9,000 feet, we have flow around our two primary lows out in the Bering Sea. That's getting as high as 35 knots on the eastern side, as high as 45 knots as we get further out to the west. And as we push closer towards the Bering Strait, 50 knots out of the southeasterly direction there. But the majority of our flow over the western part, bringing in that southerly air, is coming in at about 40 knots there, strongest as we get closer towards the Norton Sound area, 45 knots out over much of the areas around Aniak down to Sleepmute and Sparivon, and then up along the west coast of the state, dropping down to about 15 to 20 knots, circulating around the high, and then out of a northerly direction, 15 to 20 knots coming in over the southeast part of the state. Dropping us down to 3,000 feet, we have our flow out over the majority of mainland Alaska out of a southeasterly direction, getting up to as high as 30 knots there. Moving in over the southeast part of the state out of a southerly or southeasterly direction, anywhere from 10 to 20 knots, but our strongest winds are around the main low pressure systems in the Bering Sea. Southerly direction moving in over Kodiak and Bristol Bay areas up to as high as 45 knots there. Becoming more southeasterly around 30 knots, and then out over the southern Bering and Aleutian Islands out of a northwesterly direction, 25 to 30 knots there. And that'll take us into our turbulence forecast, where quite a bit of turbulence along the eastern Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, into the YK Delta areas. Some of that extending out as far as the south central part of the state, and then all the way up the western coast, primarily below 6,000 feet with the strongest we saw with those core of southeasterly winds getting up to as high as 45 and 50 knots. Going to see some more moderate turbulence with that, and then a little bit weaker below 5,000 feet up along the Arctic coastline. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Sky conditions refer to sky cover from clouds like these or from other layers aloft. Now, what's the format that the sky conditions take? Well, it starts off with the amount of the sky cover, then the height of that sky cover, and sometimes with clouds the type, or if it's an indefinite ceiling, it'll come with vertical visibility. Now, the sky cover is reported in eighths of sky cover. Maybe that's an effort to conform to the New York Stock Exchange reporting, which is also done in eighths. The height of the various layers of sky cover is given in a 3-digit format in hundreds of feet. They add leading zeros when they need to in order to fill in all the spaces. So if you see 009, that is 900 feet. 010 is 1,000 feet, and 100 is 10,000 feet. What you do is you add 2 zeros at the end of what you see here in order to get the height of that sky cover. Here are the abbreviations that you might see for the amount of the sky cover. If you see SKC or CLR, it means sky clear. There are no clouds whatsoever showing up in the sky. If you see the word few, it means few, and it means that there is more than 0 up to 2/8 coverage of the clouds. SCT stands for scattered and means that you have 3/8 to 4/8 coverage. BKN means broken, and you have 5/8 to 7/8 coverage of the cloud layer. OVC stands for overcast, and you have 8/8 or solid coverage of that sky condition. Now, if you see the abbreviation VV, VV stands for vertical visibility, and it means that you have an indefinite ceiling at that reporting point. Now, the difference between SKC and CLR for no clouds up there depends on how the observation was taken. A way to remember it is that CLR for clear means that no one was here. SKC means there was someone to see, because CLR, the abbreviation CLR, is used at automated stations when there is no layer at or below 12,000 feet AGL. SKC is used when there was a person there, so think of SKC as someone to see. There was a person there, whereas CLR is at automated stations. Now on the sky cover, one way to remember it is few means more than 0 to 2. Scattered is up through half, and broken is more than half, but not quite solid. When the sky condition is being determined, there is no provision for a thin or a transparent layer. All sky cover is considered to be opaque. There is no ceiling designator either in the METAR report. The ceiling is simply the first broken or overcast layer that is reported. For instance, if the first sky cover layer that was reported was BKN 009, that would be a broken layer and a ceiling at 900 feet AGL. Now, it is very nice to know about things like towering cumulus and cumulonimbus clouds. Those may be reported in the sky condition, and they are the only types of clouds that will be. TCU for towering cumulus, CB for cumulonimbus. If there is a human observer, that information that those clouds are present may be added in the sky condition information. So when you take a look at the METAR that we're working through, it would be coded right along with the sky condition, in this case OVC for overcast, meaning solid or 8/8 coverage, at 010 meaning 1,000 feet AGL, and CB the cumulonimbus. There was a human observer to add that information. May not always be there, but if there's a human observer, it might be. Now, other types of important clouds like altocumulus standing lenticular and cirrocumulus standing lenticular may be reported in the remarks.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. Things to note that we do have some ice cover over Cook Inlet and areas from Bristol Bay extending up towards Nunavik Island. We are expecting those to start to retreat as we do have that strong southerly warm air coming in, and that is going to happen over the next couple days here. And then as we take a look now at the southeast part of the state for our winds and seas, we have a more northerly becoming easterly flow getting as high as 20 knots throughout much of the southeast. Then we have our seas in the inside waters 3 to 4 feet, a little bit higher up to as high as 9 feet, highest to the south out in the eastern parts of the Gulf. And then on Friday, flow dropping down over the Gulf, easterly about 10 knots, and then up to as high as 20 knots in the inside waters out of a north or northeasterly direction there. Seas only getting up to as high as about 6 feet. Taking us into the south central area, we have primarily easterly flow, getting up to as high as 25 knots closest to the Barren Islands, a little bit weaker further to north Prince William Sound and northern parts of Cook Inlet, only around 10 knots there. Strongest seas further to the south, up to as high as 13 feet, and then down to 10 as we get closer along the North Gulf Coast, and Prince William Sound only about 2 feet there. Then on Friday, things dropping down all over the place. Variable winds 10 knots for almost all locations. Southern part of Cook Inlet out of a northerly direction. Seas dropping down to about 6 to 7 feet out in the western parts of the Gulf. Then out over the Alaska Peninsula, flows stronger on the Pacific side there out of a southwesterly direction, transitioning over to southeasterly, about 30 knots for both of those. Easterly, about 30 knots in Bristol Bay. And then we have seas up to as high as 16 feet, strongest on the Pacific side, down only around 10 feet on the Bering side. Then on Friday, flow still out of a primarily southeasterly direction, strongest on the Pacific side once again, 20 to 30 knots there. Seas only around 8 feet, a little bit lower on the Bering side. Taking us out over the Aleutian Islands, flow primarily out of a northerly or westerly direction, as high as 30 knots, strongest out to the east. And then switching it up a little bit south of Akka, we have easterly flow around 30 knots there. Then out to the west, dropping down to around 20 knots in a northerly direction closer to Shimia, with seas getting only up to about as high as 10 feet out there, a little bit higher up to about 12 to 14 as we get further off to the east. And then on Friday, flow primarily out of an easterly direction, becoming more northerly by the western Aleutian Islands, 20 knots there, but up to as high as 35 knots on the Pacific side, south of the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. Seas now getting up to as high as 15 feet, weaker on the Bering side. As we look along the west coast, primary flow out of an easterly direction, 25 to 35 knots, strongest south of Nunavik Island. Then westerly direction near the Pribilofs, about 25 knots there. Seas getting up to as high as 9 feet, highest further to the south. Then on Friday, flow becoming more southerly, getting up to as high as 25 to 30 knots, places in the north, down to around 15 knots in the south. Let's look along the Arctic coast, all ice covered here out of an easterly direction, 35 knots out in the east, as well as down along most of the places in the west, down to around 20 knots near Kivalina. Then as we look into Friday, still primarily easterly flow, getting up to as high as 25 knots out west, and then still pretty strong out of the Beaufort Sea, 35 knots there. Quick recap of the weather for the state. We have a lot of southerly flow coming in tonight, bringing in a lot of rain throughout the south central, a little bit of mixture with snow, especially in higher elevations there. Rain throughout much of the Bristol Bay and YK Delta area. A little bit more snow as we get further to the north around the Norton and Kotzebue Sound area, and that is going to start to transition over to rain as we move throughout the hours tonight, bringing in the potential for some freezing rain in those areas, and that's going to stretch further to the north as time progresses, and then some snow mixed with fog along the Arctic coast, not so much in the southeast part of the state, pretty dry there. We are going to see some rain mixing with snow in areas of the eastern Bering Sea extending down into the Aleutian Islands. As we look into Thursday, that southerly flow continuing to bring in rain throughout the Bristol Bay area with that rain and snow mix all along the western coast of the state, and that transition with the freezing rain is going to push further to the north as the day progresses on Thursday, affecting more of the Kotzebue Sound area than the places further to the south. And with Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.